He's the host of the Good Word podcast on Yahoo Sports Ball Don't Lie channel. He's also a writer at Yahoo Sports and host on SiriusXM's NBA Radio. The brother's an up-and-coming star. He does great work covering the NBA. He's my little young buddy, the one and only Vince Goodwill. What's going on, big time? How are you, man? How's everything?
Hey, my debut on the Stephen A. Smith show, man. I appreciate it, man. How you doing?
Well-deserved, my brother. Well-deserved. Good to see you. You just heard me talking about LeBron, Steph, KD, Booker, Kyrie, Luka, AD, LeBron. And we're talking about possibly 4 of those stars not even making it into the playoffs. How bad is that for the NBA?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, Stephen A. If you look at it and say that the play-in numbers, those ratings, those like March Madness. You know what I mean? Like it's the NBA's version of March Madness. Those one-game rating sample sizes will be great. But, yeah, it won't be great to see LeBron and Steph being on the sidelines for the playoffs. But, Stephen A., at some point, the NBA is going to have to transition to its next generation, to Anthony Edwards, to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to embrace Nikola Jokic. At some point, this change is going to have to be made to the next guys, and they can't let go of Steph. They can't let go of LeBron. You see it every Saturday night. We're getting some combination of Kevin Durant and Giannis or LeBron and Steph. Like, the league won't introduce the new generation until they have to. And usually, you know this, Stephen A., from history, you don't hand the mantle over to the next generation. They snatch it. And these young guys are snatching it right now.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think they should snatch it. I think Anthony Edwards could snatch it. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander could snatch it. Don't tell me Devin Booker can't stand it. We know what a rough rider he is. I get all of that. I guess what I'm saying is this, though. The fact that those guys won't even be participating, you're talking about 3 or 4 of those guys not even participating in the first round of the playoffs, is not a great thing. But I will concede this. Kyrie's left-handed hook, from the free throw line against Denver this past Sunday, that definitely helped. Anthony Edwards putting on the show he's been putting on this week, even in a loss to Denver last night, that helps. So I do think those were both nationally televised games. Maybe the NBA is finally gravitating to that and making sure they're going about the business of promoting a new breed. Are you feeling that way at all?
Absolutely. And I do think there's value, Stephen A., if LeBron and Steph are in the playoffs and you see Anthony Edwards, you see those young dudes take it from them. Like, Stephen, I know you're big on boxing. Remember Muhammad Ali fighting Larry Holmes, and it didn't look pretty, but you got to see the changing of the guard. And basketball ain't boxing, but sometimes it's going to be violent. It's going to be the old guys looking older. Steph and LeBron are having such miraculous years for their ages, but they can only help their teams win, but so much. Stephen A., that speaks to the talent in this league. That speaks to the reverence that we have for them. But I don't know if these young guys have the reverence for LeBron and Steph and KD. They look at them and saying, you know what? We can make our mark off of these dudes. If they want to come in a 7-game series, we'll knock their asses out. I think that's a beautiful transition of power in the NBA. If it should happen.
I think it's a beautiful transition as well, as long as they're there to get knocked out. If they're going before you get an opportunity to get your hands on them, it's a different animal. But let me switch to Anthony Edwards, because when I think about young bloods on the come up, the new breed, who's that person that can take that mantle and take it to another level, that is the name I first come up with. May not have the consistency that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander puts on display, but the combination of his greatness, his skill set, his athleticism, along with his personality, I think Anthony Edwards is that perfect guy. The only knock I have against him, Vince, is the fact that he came playing around All-Star Weekend. And when you're that next dude, you got to seize those moments, even in an exhibition-type atmosphere, just to let the world know, put him on notice, oh, I'm the real deal, and I'm coming for that mantle. How did you feel about him during All-Star Weekend and passing that up?
Steve, I was disappointed, because I felt like it was the opportunity that was just sitting right in front of him. And I do think to some degree it stems from LeBron James treating the dunk contest like it was something that wasn't really important. Then that trickles down to the next generation. But at some point, it's going to have to change if we're going to continue this. Anthony Edwards, you brought up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The thing for Anthony Edwards is, the personality is one thing, but Stephen A., he's an American-born ball player.
Right.
We don't have those dudes anymore. You think of the last 5 or 6 MVPs, they've all been foreign players. LeBron, Steph, they're aging out. Kevin Durant, they're aging out. You need to have an American-born basketball player with the charisma, who has the sort of agenda to want to embrace all this stuff. Like Stephen A., we see so much of these guys, so many of these guys on Instagram, on Twitter, but we don't know anything about them. You know, their images are so carefully constructed that you don't actually get a chance to know who they are authentically. I feel like with Anthony Edwards, you see the joy that he plays with. You see sort of that youthful exuberance that he displays on the floor, and even some of the innocence. And I think that's something the NBA needs to wrap its arms around. They need to go to Anthony Edwards and his people and say, hey, this is important not just for you, but for the entire NBA. Because we don't know what we can expect from Ja Morant, because Zion Williamson is just starting to figure things out, Anthony Edwards is the last guy of the young guys that the NBA can really look at and say, we're going to market everything around you. And I don't know about you, Steve. Does it look like the Ant-Man? I don't say he plays like him, but does the Ant-Man move like Michael Jordan?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like the fluidity. He moves like him. Nobody's ever moved like Jordan. I feel like this dude is as close to anybody as far as just how he moves, how easy, how fluid he is on the floor.
I'll bring three names into it: Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter. I think it's meshed in. This brother's athleticism is off the chart. And God help the rest of the NBA if he develops a consistent three-point shot. God help the rest of the NBA. I mean, he shoots better than 37%. Missed a couple last night that he could have made, should have made, but that's neither here nor there. I'm going to bring up a subject, and I had no intentions of bringing up this subject in regards to Ja Morant, but I have to. I know he's injured. He's out for the season. Not throwing any shade on him, wishing him luck. The NBA is better when Ja Morant is on the court balling. No question about that. Having said that, because of these young thoroughbreds on the come up, it sort of feels like Ja Morant missed the window because of the troubles he got himself into and then the injury that followed. It's not to say he's not going to come back on the court and wreak havoc and do his thing, but it was his. It was his, and everybody would have been looking up at him. Now he's got to come back next season and remind people, in my mind, of what he once was, just to be in that pack, in that conversation. That's the feeling I get when I think about Ja Morant and a missed opportunity. What about you?
I agree with you. Think about this, and not just from the NBA standpoint, Stephen A. When we think about some of the great marketing that the league has had, it wasn't the league doing the marketing. It was Nike doing it. Ja Morant has a Nike shoe that Nike can't really market, A, because Ja Morant isn't on the floor, and B, because of there's this stink around him because of his behavior and the unfortunate things that he's been involved with. And now he can't even redeem himself on the floor and make you forget about those things. And that window is open and it closes really quick. This world moves faster than ever, quicker than ever. You have a very small window to make a first impression with the American people. And Ja's first impression was really good until we got to know more. And now we're at the point where, yeah, Steve, we're going to forget about Ja. Not that we're going to forget about him. Ja has work to do. And it's not that he can't do it, but he's fighting from behind. He's fighting from the momentum. God forbid the Minnesota Timberwolves make it to the Western Conference Finals.
Right.
And you get to see Anthony Edwards every other night in May when the weather gets warm and there's fewer games, and you get to see that smile and that personality. That was supposed to be Ja Morant. You got to see Ja and his dad and all that, and then we found out that they were all overexposed, and we had to pull it back some. Now you're going to have a risk of, do we put that camera back on Ja? Do we invest in him? Do we want to put that equity in him, not knowing whether he's grown or matured from his previous transgressions?
I'm a grown-ass man, so I'm going to acknowledge when I made a mistake or when it's time to move on to another narrative. And when it comes to Kyrie Irving, it's right where I want it to be. We ain't talking about no off-the-court stuff. We ain't talking about him not showing up to work. We ain't talking about him missing games. We ain't talking about headlines that he don't need to be associated with. We're talking about one of the most brilliant offensive magicians this game has ever seen. I'm thinking about the days of Nate Tiny Archibald to the days of Isaiah Thomas to Allen Iverson himself. I'm looking at the great small guards this game has ever seen. And Kyrie is up there, if not at the very top of that conversation. Looking at him right now, the way that he is playing, with Luka doing what we know Luka can do, what can the Dallas Mavericks do this year?
Steve, we've had conversations about teams like the Boston Celtics having trouble in crunch time and looking at Jason Tatum's numbers and saying, Jason, you haven't made the shots when it came down to it, right? The Dallas Mavericks don't have that problem. They have Kyrie Irving, who in the crunch time is like 18 of 31, and he can shoot from different angles. And we've seen what he can do in the NBA Finals in the Game 7 on the road. He's still that player. He's fearless and he's unguardable. And you're right. He has the Isaiah Thomas skill set with the Rod Strickland package finishing underneath the rim with the Kenny Anderson handles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like from a basketball player, you build Kyrie Irving from the ground up. You actually couldn't build Kyrie Irving from the ground up. Steve, I play basketball left-handed, and I couldn't do what that man did with that leaning left-hander. I mean, they are going to be so dangerous. If you put them in a first-round playoff series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that's light, a team that's young, a team that's going to be satisfied with just getting the number 1 seed, and you put Luka Doncic on the road in a situation where he can steal a game, and Kyrie Irving in a situation where he's the secondary option, nobody would want to see those two in a close game. And to me, that's scary.
What should it say to us that nobody minds seeing LeBron James and Anthony Davis?
Well, LeBron is old, and Anthony Davis can get hit in the face. You know what I mean? Like, it just comes down to Stephen A.
It just comes down to that, right?
Like that, but that's just what it is. And I do think, Stephen A., there will come a point where the league has to move on from LeBron, and you want Anthony Davis to take that mantle. We've been asking Anthony Davis, make this to your team, make this your franchise, make this your league. It hasn't happened despite the fact that he's played a number of games this year and played at such a high level. And if it's just going to be that way, then the Lakers are going to wind up being a team that other teams look at and say, whether they're in the play-in, whether they're in the playoffs, we're not afraid of going into L.A. We're not worried about them coming into our building. If LeBron scores 40, oh, well, so be it. Like, that's the worst thing you can be, is a historical player that nobody cares if you drop 40 because they're not fearful that you can actually beat them.
2 more questions before I let you get on out of here. You brought up Jason Tatum a bit earlier. He was my league MVP until he went out there and didn't get it done against the Denver Nuggets, losing 2 games. And then we know Jokic is climbing the ladder. We see what Anthony Edwards is doing. He's in an MVP conversation. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I'm going to keep mentioning that name again because of the model of consistency that he's put on display. But Jason Tatum, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the Denver Nuggets are going to win the championship this year. They're the reigning defending champions. They're the best, no doubt about it. They beat the Boston Celtics, the best record in the NBA thus far this year in the 2 times they played them. But Tatum and Jaylen Brown with Porzingis, with an elite defensive backcourt in White and Holiday, I'm not ruling out that Boston can win the chip. You look at Jason Tatum specifically and the Boston Celtics from a macro perspective. What are your expectations?
Stephen, you named all the players who play. You named all their good players, but you can't name their 7th and 8th man. We talking about Sam Hauser, Peyton Pritchard, God bless them. But I think you're putting too much on their top 6 players. You're putting too much on a guy like Jason Tatum to produce late in games. It's almost like he's trying to produce his Kobe Bryant Mamba moments late in games, and those shoes don't fit him, as great of a player as he is. Now, Steve, if you tell me the Boston Celtics blow everybody away, that the regular season is the regular season, they continue that during the playoffs because they outshoot you, they can defend you at all these different levels, I'm with you. But if you tell me they're in close game after close game and that 3-point shooting can go up and down in the playoff series, Stephen A., who's to say that they get to through the Eastern Conference Finals in a very weak Eastern Conference? I don't think there's a guarantee they even get to the finals.
Last question for you. We started off this discussion with me talking about LeBron James and JJ Redick's podcast, Mind the Game. You and I have been covering basketball for years, along with a plethora of our contemporaries and what have you. How big of a deal is this to see LeBron James doing a podcast on basketball, particularly with a mind like JJ Redick, who obviously calls NBA games for ABC and ESPN and does an outstanding job as a member of the ESPN family? What are your thoughts about them doing the podcast, and how do you think it's going to resonate with folks?
I'm very curious of the visual element of it, Stephen A., because you can explain basketball. Like, me and you have sat at the feet of some of the best coaches in the history of the league, and they could explain basketball in such a way that was digestible towards us because we were basketball minds. But if they're talking to the masses, you've got to find a way not only to reach them, but to entertain them. If you talk over their heads, you're going to lose the connection with them. I think it's interesting that LeBron James is entering the podcast space. But Stephen A., you know, like I know, LeBron James is always interested in controlling the narrative. I wonder what the narrative is going to be here. Not necessarily a negative agenda, what's the narrative that he's going to try to push coming out of this podcast? If there's a visual element, I'm all for it. It's like Kobe Bryant and ESPN's Detail and some other guys who explain the game really, really well. But I'm wondering what LeBron James's narrative is going to be coming out of it.
Well, the part of it that makes me laugh, Vince, is that if you know LeBron and him controlling the narrative, I'm certainly not knocking him. I'm looking forward to the podcast. I'm rooting for them. I hope they do very, very well with it, which I anticipate they will. I think they picked up like 200,000 subscribers in day one. So major props. Once again, LeBron James making his voice heard and making his presence felt. The interesting part is they possibly think, or LeBron possibly thinks, that's going to shut people up. What he doesn't realize is all it's going to do is create more questions and more dialogue. So thank you, LeBron James, for entertaining us all and providing even more equipment. Vince Goodwill, appreciate you, my brother. Thank you so much, my man. Keep doing a great job you've been doing, all right? We'll talk soon.
Hey, can I say one thing to you, Stephen A?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's up?
I don't know if people understand this. People like Stephen A., Michael Wilbon, David Aldridge, Rob Parker. I've learned at the feet of these gentlemen throughout my entire career. Their encouragement, like sometimes kicking you in the ass a little bit. Every time I've had a career decision, I've called Stephen A. Smith. And every time Stephen A. has told me, in no uncertain terms, you better take that damn job. So, Steve, I appreciate you, my man. Love you. Congrats on everything.
All the best, man. Love you too, my man. We'll talk soon. You take it easy, Vince. Until next time.
Yes, sir.